Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of What a Fuster Cluck. I'm your host, Lolita Keys, and on today's episode, we will be talking about mixed signals, market moves, and the Iran narrative collapse. As always, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to What a Fuster Cluck on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. I know so many of you are listening based on the analytics that I'm getting, which I absolutely love and appreciate, but such a small percentage of you have actually taken that step to hit that subscribe button. And so please, no matter where you're listening to this podcast, remember to follow on Apple or subscribe on Spotify and or YouTube or all three. I would really love and appreciate that. And if you have any questions or comments at the end of this episode, you can reach out to me, whatafusterclucklk@gmail.com. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Lots to go over this week. You know, things are just moving so fast. It's really hard sometimes for me to decide, what do I want to talk about this week? And I know sometimes it seems like I'm all over the place, just a broad spectrum of topics. It's kind of whatever tickles my fancy, whatever I feel like talking about this week, whatever has really impacted me in some way, shape, or form. And of course, I think right now, if you're an American citizen living in this country, you cannot help but be impacted by this war with Iran, most notably at the gas pump, where I have been suffering from sticker shock recently. And, you know, it's interesting because I get it. Gas has gone up and down, you know, since the beginning of gas being needed in automobiles. I understand this, but it's always a little bit more shocking when it literally goes up by an entire dollar in a very short time span. And I think we all feel that. When it's like a slight or gradual increase, like what we see with the supply and demand over different seasons of the year, it's just not quite as impactful. But when it's like, boom, you know, you kind of can't help but notice it and understand what the downstream effects of that really are. So if what this is, this war, like, can you even answer that question? Can any of you really answer that question with confidence? And when you're answering the question, why are we at war with Iran? Not just be able to say why, but really be able to explain why. I think that's the key. That's the important thing to really making the determination of whether you truly understand it or whether you're just parroting what you're hearing from your favorite news source. So I just want to say that if this is what leadership looks like, why does it feel like no one is actually in control? The deadlines keep moving. Negotiations may not even be happening based on what we're hearing. And the markets are reacting to social media posts. This is where we are. Markets reacting to social media posts. This is not just a foreign conflict. It's a breakdown in how information, power, and trust are being handled in this country and also abroad. The core problem, the way I see it, the confusion is really in the story. It's not just about Iran. It's not about whether or not NATO should be participating. It's not all just President Trump. There's probably an argument to be made that it's all Bibi Netanyahu, but I digress. That's not what this episode is about. The real issue is constant contradictory messaging, unclear strategy, and then reactive communication. We are not watching a plan unfold, ladies and gentlemen. We are watching messaging colliding in real time. And it is frustrating as hell. And I, for one, am just getting so sick and tired of being ping-ponged around by politicians in this and just not seeing the results that the American people by far and away voted for with this administration. Where to begin? Let's start with Trump, the fearless leader of the free world, right? Trump is moving deadlines and also sending mixed signals. You know, it's a difficult conversation to have with people who are so like pro-Trump that they can never point out any of the bad things he's doing. And I never want to be one of those people, regardless of who I vote for. No one is perfect. And it's important that we are able to honestly provide feedback on our leadership in a way that isn't so idealistic and brainwashed, quite frankly. So what's being discussed across the media? Multiple public statements have been suggesting that there are imminent deals going on, imminent deadlines, which we keep hearing about, imminent consequences for not following whatever new request is out there today. But timelines are shifting consistently or resetting completely. The tone of leadership is fluctuating between urgency, chaos, confidence, and pressure tactics. I want to read you some of the truths that Trump has been posting over this past week alone, and just how, like, kind of absolutely annoying these all are and confusing. Every day, and this is obviously what's been impacting the market too, but it seems like every day there's just some new thing that's on the line. So, one of his tweets from earlier this week, as per Iranian, actually this was recently, more recently in the last couple of days, I believe. As per Iranian government request, please let this statement serve to represent that I am pausing the period of energy plant destruction by 10 days to Monday, April 6th, 2026 at 8 p.m. Eastern time. Thanks so much for being clear about the fact that it's Eastern time, because I really kept thinking, oh, is this going to be Pacific or Eastern? When do I set my watch? Talks are ongoing, and despite erroneous statements to the contrary by the fake news media and others, they are going very well. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. Okay, here's another one. The Iranian negotiators are very different and, in quotations, strange. They are begging, also in quotations, us to make a deal, which they should be doing since they have been militarily obliterated with zero chance of a comeback. And yet they publicly state that they are only looking at our proposal. Wrong, he says in all caps. They better get serious soon before it is too late, because once that happens, there is no turning back. Let's also go to this one. I am pleased to report that the United States of America and the country of Iran have had, over the last 2 days, very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East. Based on the tenor and tone of these in-depth, detailed, and constructive conversations, which will continue throughout the week, I have instructed the Department of War to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure, etc., etc. I'm going to stop there. Um, First, let's talk about how different sides of the political spectrum are interpreting these tweets. Many of Trump's supporters are saying this is strategic ambiguity, it's negotiation leverage, and also you don't telegraph your moves. But what's interesting with Trump is he kind of, everything he's doing is always testing the market. That much seems obvious to me. He'll sprinkle something out there, see how people react, and then he'll kind of go on and do that over and over and over again until ultimately he makes a decision. Some people, will say that that's really smart, very strategic, very much like the book that he wrote about, oh God, what's the name of his book? I'll have to come back and figure that out. So, The Art of the Deal. The Art of the Deal. Okay. Very much like his book, The Art of the Deal. It also reminds me of The Art of War, right? So if you've ever read The Art of War or even just looked up the Cliff Notes, it's sort of like the guide, the instruction guide for how to properly conduct war and typically who's going to come out the winner. So what are the critics of Trump saying? They're saying there's a lack of what appears to be a coherent plan. There's a lot of performative messaging, typical Trump, and there's a lot of instability that's coming from all of this mixed messaging. But what's funny is that apart from our own divide on this information is Iran's response. So before I jump into that, I just want to highlight the fact that whether you're a supporter or a detractor or a critic or whatever, maybe you voted for Trump and you're just not happy with what you're seeing coming from the administration. Ultimately, I have to believe that our leaders are not so stupid that they would literally be giving away the very thing that we're going to be doing or the very plan that they're actually working on. I think there's always going to be an element of surprise, regardless of what's being put out there by Trump or, whomever, Hegseth, whoever it is. I think there's always going to be some element of surprise, and we're never going to know the full story until probably many years after the thing even happens. So this is the part that I find most comical is Iran's response. So you've got Trump sending out all these tweets. We're negotiating. We're talking to the Iranians. We're having these productive conversations. But then a lot of Iranian sources are coming out and saying, hell no, we're not talking. There is no negotiation. Every time we try to negotiate with you, you end up striking us. And we have zero trust, which is really kind of funny coming from a regime like Iran. However, I digress. At the end of the day, what seems to be consistent is Trump obviously cannot point out or say who exactly we're negotiating with. Like, are we talking to a bot somewhere? Nobody knows. I'd like to think that, again, we are smarter than that and we're talking to a real person. But who is this person? Who are these people? Do they carry any weight at all? Is it potentially a new government that's going to be eventually installed that we're working with as the Iranian people prepare to rise up and overthrow the IRGC and whoever the hell is in place right now. I don't even know who the new Ayatollah is because every new report I hear is telling me somebody else is now dead and nobody knows where they are. But what I can tell you is that most Iranian officials and across Iranian news outlets are saying there is no active negotiations and they are resisting the US pressure to do any type of negotiating. It seems to me, and really what's kind of my fear coming out as I'm talking through this episode is they're ready. They're kind of like, hey, you started it and we're going to finish it and we're going to take it to the bitter, bloody end. And the last thing any American wants to see is troops on the ground. And so I can only hope and pray at this point that should it come to that, that Trump will just go ahead and call whatever victory you want a victory, pull out of there, and strategically take a step back to figure out what the hell are we doing? Because the global impacts of this war, and what it's doing to the American economy, which is the biggest economy we should all give a crap about, are not looking so good. And so if the Iranian officials are saying there are no active negotiations, this creates, obviously, a major disconnect. The U.S. narrative is talks are working, pressure is working, but the Iranian narrative is no talks and we're going to keep going. So if you're going to keep threatening us, we're ready and we're going to hit you with whatever we have left until there's nothing else that we could possibly do. So either negotiations are happening quietly and strategically, which is what I really want to believe, or one side isn't telling the truth. If you asked me what my gut feeling was, I would say maybe a little bit of both. Maybe a little bit of both, because maybe whoever we're communicating with over there is not affiliated with the IRGC or but is ready for a change and is sort of like a sleeper cell in there. I don't know. Now I'm getting really conspiratorial and talking about things I have really no idea about. But at the end of the day, we don't know, and we're not going to know until things hopefully start to take a turn for the better. But I will also tell you that there's a part of me that's kind of leaning towards, well, obviously Trump is lying, and maybe he's not lying completely, but he's such a flip-flopper. We all know this. And you might say, well, then why would people vote for this guy? And I have to say, we're just looking for strong leadership. I think what we saw with Biden and Harris and what we saw in the ticket of Harris and Waltz, honestly, is just weak policy, weak-minded people collapsing and crippling themselves to whatever fringe nonsense is being requested from the very far, far, far left of this country, not focusing on what the everyday average American citizen really cares about. And so how can people say Trump is a flip-flopper or know that about him and still vote for him? Because honestly, there are very few honest politicians out there. I can only count a few and on one hand, which is pretty sad considering how many we actually have out there. And I really wish that we would start to put a bigger emphasis on local elections and how things are impacting you at home than we do on our presidential elections, because we've got people who've been sitting in positions of power for far too long and nobody voting them out because the average person is just working, trying to collect a paycheck and has no idea what's going on in politics, yet it will impact them on an everyday level. And the only way we're going to change that is if we start getting more involved in our local politics and making the changes from the ground up and getting fresh perspectives in there, people who actually drive change. And a lot of times these people are more entrepreneurial in nature. So they're off just like running their businesses and they end up morphing into politics one way or the other when policies start to impact their bottom line. But we need just more of a collective cauldron of average, everyday people to come together and to start to rebuild at the local and state level so that we can just start to weed these people out, and get more people to go out and vote in those types of elections. But that's a conversation for another day. So those are my thoughts on Trump's truth pose and what Iran is saying and what the hell is really going on and who even knows anymore, which is why I say repeatedly over and over again, please make sure you are listening to a diverse array of political commentary. Stop putting all of your eggs into just the Fox basket, the CNN basket, the NPR basket, the Ben Shapiro basket. Please diversify, just like your portfolio, right? If you want to make money in the stock market, you know you've got to diversify. And it's no different in your news. If you do not diversify your thinking, you will ultimately be brainwashed and subscribe to one ideology only and live in your little bubble, which will do you no good and will just keep you in a perpetual state of piss offery, because that is what politics today is meant to do. It's meant to just keep you aggravated, keep you pissed off so that you hate the other side and you continue voting one way down the ballot. Another interesting component to this is the NATO position, right? The background or the escalation risk. And what is NATO's role in this? And I'm not going to get too into the weeds on this, but it's just a little something I wanted to point out. So it seems to me that there's some updates in the tone of this, whether or not whether or not we are continuing to position NATO as more of a defensive probability, whether increased readiness posture is being discussed. And I can tell you that from what I'm seeing online, what I'm hearing, what I'm reading, the concerns are we actually containing this conflict, or are we widening the circle of this conflict? And this is the part that really scares me, is the widening of this. I don't think people understand. We can brag about how strong our military is, but wars in the Middle East, the war in Vietnam, just decades upon decades of these sort of pointless wars that we get into trying to overthrow and establish, democratic folks in these administrations. It just fails time and time again. And there are so many people out there right now who have served. Listen to the Joe Kent, Sean Ryan interview, for instance. You will hear, unfortunately, a lot of the sadness, anger, bitterness, and resentment that has come from the war in Iraq. And I'm just really concerned that, as always, we are talking a big game, but at the end of the day, when you are dealing with people who are truly unafraid to die for a cause or fight for what they believe in, I feel like the odds will ultimately be stacked against us. And I wonder if we truly understand what we are up against. And I would imagine a certain percentage of us do, a certain percentage of soldiers do. But we are playing with fire, in my opinion, at the behest of Israel, who I understand is our largest ally in the Middle East and does supply us with a lot of intel. But it seems to me that our relationship with Israel is more detrimental than positive, especially within the last 30 to 40 years. And the more I listen to people like Scott Horton and Dave Smith, and there's one other guy whose name is escaping me, but the more I listen to people like that, Thomas Massey, Ron Paul, the more I realize just what a tangled web we weave and how bad the situation with Israel truly is from even our own national security perspective. I mean, we are funding them. If it wasn't for us, they wouldn't even have the Iron Dome. And in return, they're out there doing things that Trump is explicitly telling them not to do. And they're just like, F it, I'm going to do it anyway. And what are you going to do about it? And it's really getting to a point where I'm ready to just say, hang them out to dry. If they're not going to work as a partner and an ally, and they're going to be out there, this little fish in a big ass pond, then go ahead. It's like, it's no different than a child that won't listen. You can tell them 1,000 times, don't put your hand on that hot stove. But at some point you have to step back and just let them touch the thing and learn the lesson. So let's backtrack a little bit to the truth posts and what's been happening in the market, because this is also introducing the whole abhorrent situation of insider trading with government folks in government and the information that they have and how it, changes the market and how they're able to move money around and make millions of dollars. Hello, jokes on Nancy Pelosi as per usual, but there are many others coming out of this one in particular. So I believe it was Sunday when Trump made a tweet about that things were looking good, like we were coming, this thing was going to come to an end, and blah 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 blah. And of course, Monday morning the markets reacted, and you've got to wonder. I mean, Trump knows this. He knows everything that comes out of his mouth is going to impact the market one way or the other. And so, of course, you have all of these suspicious folks who just made millions of dollars, and there's just no way to deny that it's based on information that they had at the time, or even I guess you could, of course, we're going to loop it back to Trump's truths, but then you wonder how many of these folks made moves before that even came out. And so, what are people talking about when Trump is suggesting de-escalation or resolution? The immediate effects were oil prices reacted quickly downward, which is awesome. Except then Iran came out, remember, and said, what the hell is this guy talking about? We're not negotiating. So downward pressure tied to reduce war risk perception made the oil market react. I also just think it's hysterical just how sensitive the market is to something as crazy as a Truth Social post, right? Now, again, it's coming from the president of the United States. So, okay, you got to take it seriously. But the broader market sentiment really only shifted temporarily. And so I just don't want us to get all caught up in it's like fool me once, shame on me, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. I don't know what the actual quote is, but you guys know what I'm saying. And so the insider trading accusations, some commentators and online voices, of course, are going to raise the concerns that could statements like this influence markets? Well, yeah, duh. I mean, I'm sure even people that aren't involved in government moved some money around after they saw that come out. But ultimately, it's the strategic timing of when it came out, which I believe was Sunday. And so, of course, that's going to impact the markets on Monday. And who benefits from early or inside knowledge? That's the other part that's really suspect is typically it's people in government, folks in government, or people tied to those people. But so far, no confirmed finding or formal charges have happened yet. I do believe, though, that people should remain speculative. I do think this does require investigation, obviously, and I definitely think it's par for the course for everybody to be debating. So whether it's true or not, the fact that people even believe it could be true tells you everything about what's happening in our country with trust right now. And sadly, it's like a woman scorn, trust no one. Which is really kind of a shame. And trust in government and even trust in mainstream media has dwindled significantly over the last just decade, but most notably during and post COVID as well. As always, I want to get into a little bit of what we're hearing from both sides and give you just kind of a mix of what's happening. What are people saying? So on the left side, people like the New York Times, NPR, Ezra Klein, and others, their tone is really focusing on, again, the lack of clarity that they feel is coming from the administration, the risks of misinformation, and the market sensitivity to that political messaging. Of course, on Trump, their concerns are the market moving statements, which lead to the whole hello insider trading thing. And then, as always, the lack of institutional guardrails. What are right-wing folks saying? People like Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Patrick Bet-David. It's a split narrative. Ben Shapiro, among others. It really is a split narrative amongst this group of people. You've got some saying that Trump is applying all the right pressure, trying to force a deal. And, I listen to Patrick Bet-David a lot. I really love, adore, respect his show. But this one is dicey because, remember, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, Patrick Bet-David was born in Iran. He came to this country after the revolution. His story is pretty incredible and amazing and compelling. He ended up serving this country, I believe, in the army, if I'm not mistaken. And so he's just truly a patriot, truly loves this country, has really just done amazing things in this country. And on a podcast recently, he actually said America before even his native country, Iran. But I'm trying to take everything he says with a grain of salt. And I'm also finding that many of the people on his show are sort of on the same page as what he is saying with regards to this war. So really, yes, I am more interested in what are the dissenters saying. So what are the Megyn Kelly saying? What are the Tucker Carlson saying? And why are they saying it? Because these are people who campaigned really hard for Trump. And so to see them coming out and actually saying things that do shed a negative light on the administration honestly takes some balls on their part because they have a lot on the line, seeing as they were such major supporters. On the subject of Trump trying to force a deal, I mean, that's definitely what it seems like. He's talking a big game. He's talking about obliterating their energy, which, guys, this is going to lead to a major humanitarian crisis. Now, I get that some people will argue we've been at war with Iran for 47 years. I understand what the argument is there. I understand that everybody sees them as this big evil, country in the Middle East, but and that war is war and war is ugly. However, I just am truly concerned about the ramifications of this one in a way that I wasn't over some other Middle Eastern conflicts that we have gotten into. This one in particular has the potential to really significantly impact everyone's lives around the globe, including all of the major superpowers, which is what concerns me because at some point, if shit really hits the fan, the amount of aggression that we could see from our enemies and from Iran's allies could be truly catastrophic. And so I'm not trying to scare anyone here, and I'm definitely going to hope for the best. However, Iran is just not some piddly country out there in the Middle East. They provide a large majority of oil globally, and the impacts of what we are doing here are serious, significant, and come with really high consequences. So I shudder to think of what would happen to the Iranian people and the refugee crisis that would instill if we actually started obliterating their energy infrastructure. And then you've got Iran countering and saying they're going to strike desalination plants. People across the Middle East rely on these plants for clean drinking water. So again, it's the humanitarian crisis that is utterly frightening here. And after the obliteration and destruction that we saw in Gaza, I don't know that the world could tolerate this kind of just honestly awful wars that will impact millions, probably billions of people around the globe, not just those locally in the Middle East. And so I understand that there's talking points right now like peace through strength and all this other stuff and blah blah blah, but like why, guys? I really believe in what I hear from people like Tucker Carlson, people like Dave Smith. If we obliterated their nuclear program back in June, and now apparently we have obliterated some of their other, ballistic missiles or whatever else they've got over there that were a potential threat, intercontinental missiles. Who even knows what the hell they have? And like I said, we're never going to know. We're never going to know. Even when it's over, will we ever really know? We can't even get the Epstein files released, for God's sakes. And I think there's a lot of conspiracies going around right now about how those are tying back to what we're doing and our involvement. But I'm just going to stick to what I know and leave the conspiracy theories for some other fun podcasts. So what are some others, especially populists and other skeptics, saying? Their concern is being dragged into another forever war. Now, I understand you've got people out there like Bill Maher saying things like, well, it's only been a month. Like, let's not overreact. And oddly enough, as much as Bill Maher spars with Donald Trump, he's very much in favor of this war. But I think even he is against boots on the ground. And what's really frightening is Trump sending over more troops just because he wants to give the impression that he's ready to put boots on the ground and try to use this as a scare tactic? Nobody knows, but I can tell you that his approval rating will freaking tank if we end up actually putting boots on the ground. And maybe everything will work out and I'll come back to this episode and be like, well, that wasn't so bad. Like, that turned out to be really great for America. And as much as I'm a total patriot and lover of this country, I also really care about what's going on globally as well. And so if what we're doing over there is ultimately going to lead to just mass chaos across the globe, I would really caution us to just back out now while we're ahead. Just get out. Like, who cares? So we didn't get a regime change, but we have seriously crippled their military capabilities, obviously. And so at this point, we have to take a step back and start to partner with some of those countries that are allies to Iran and just make sure that we have tip top intelligence and that we stay on top of what exactly they're doing over there. Because I can tell you the other fear is what we're doing to them generationally. You know, you are literally putting yourself in a position to radicalize millions of people against Americans, even worse than we already have today. When you take out an Ayatollah during a religious time, you strike a religious leader during religious times. Like, what the hell are we doing? If somebody came to this country and murdered Trump and his entire family, there would be so much hell to pay. I don't even know that we would make it out of that. I really think it would lead to nuclear Armageddon. And yet we just go in there and just blow people up like oh well, no consequences. So the lack of transparency from our government is what's really infuriating, but also in times of war, we need to be logical and realize, guys, it's they're not going to tell us everything that they're doing. So to expect it is honestly like quite foolish. So what do independents say? A lot of what their focus is just on the failure of the system overall, which is why more than ever, I just really feel passionately about the fact that we really need to start getting involved more in at the local level to really start to see some change. And so the core message of the independents are this is not miscommunication, it's complete systemic dysfunction. And I really like that really resonates with me because that's I feel like I see a lot of that. And because of the fact that we're so politically divided right now, it's also difficult for me to see how our government could possibly work together with all the mudslinging. You know, even when we went to war with Iraq over the fake weapons of mass destruction claim, there was unity. And we are sorely lacking that right now, which only makes matters worse. So the focus is government credibility collapse. Totally agree with that. Media amplification of conflicting narratives, and then public is left to interpret the chaos, which is not going really well. And where I'm sort of hoping to come in and just say, guys, this is one of those situations where we have to maybe prepare for the worst and hope for the best because we really don't know, and we won't know. The other interesting thing that's happening in the news this week is all the talk about the TSA issues and the government lockdown, breakdown, whatever it is you want to call it this time around. And so what's being reported about the TSA situation? There's operational strain. You've had multiple hundreds of TSA agents quit, which is leaving people at the airport in these long, ridiculous lines. And ICE has had to come in, which is amazing rebranding for Trump because it's like everybody hated ICE after Minnesota. And now, it's like painting them in this new picture of, oh, look how efficient they are. Honestly, I will say, I think it's a good idea. You've got these people, you're paying these people. If you are losing TSA agents and you got to get somebody in there because we rely on air travel in this country, well, then awesome. But then there's the pay and the staffing concerns, which as a working person in this country, this is the part that pisses me off more than anything, because while you've got these government officials being assholes, pretending like they're standing up for you, all of these bills that pass are bullshit and they are all so bloated. To me, that's the part that needs to be illegal. If you have a bill that is a bajillion pages long, you know damn well that they are putting more things into that bill that have no business being in that bill. But this is all where the freaking dirty deals just come into play. And then who suffers? The American taxpayer. And now these TSA folks who haven't been paid, I believe, since Valentine's Day. This is awful and unacceptable. While these government officials are sitting back, taking their little break, pretending to be your, cheerleader, your proponent and mine. And meanwhile, they're still collecting a paycheck. So they don't see a break in the action, at least not to my knowledge. If I'm wrong about that, somebody please fact check me. But there's budget disputes, there's government funding instability, and then the broader federal workforce pressures of this constant nonsense, political theater. If we could just start to trim the fat from these bills, put the focus on what these bills actually are, and then start the back and forth negotiation from there, you're never going to get everything that you want in the bill. And some of the problems that I'm seeing with the SAVE Act in particular and the whole voter ID, of course, voter ID sounds great on paper, but what nobody's telling you, or what you probably don't know, is that they want you to get a completely separate form of ID to be able to vote. Now, maybe this has changed, but last I heard, last I checked, last I read, That was not the case. You should be able to use a valid, legitimate US passport or driver's license. But no, like this is the Democrats' argument that oh, well, we have to go out now and get this whole separate ID and people have to work and nobody has time to actually do that. And so now you're going to have people coming out that are wealthier and probably more Republican or conservative, which is interesting because there's so much money on the liberal side of the House that it's ridiculous to even make that implication that only, conservatives are going to be able to take the time off of work to go out and get their voter ID. But this is the part to me, again, this is the fluff. This is the bullshit because I think most people agree that voter ID is necessary. You need an ID to get on a plane. You need an ID to buy alcohol. You need an ID to get into a club. Like you need an ID for all this ridiculous nonsense, but you could just go vote, which carries so much weight in this country completely anonymously without any ID. You could just show up and cast your ballot, or apparently you can mail one in even if you're a dead person. Now, I understand maybe we don't have a lot of this going on and maybe fraud isn't completely rampant, but there is definitely no zero. The number of fraud is not zero. And so I don't care if it's 10 out of a million fraudulent ballots. That's 10 too many, in my opinion, especially in close elections. So something needs to be done here. Why does this all matter? Well, again, this isn't directly about Iran, but it just leads to the chaos that's going on in our government right now and this shit show that this country is turning into. It shows all of the internal dysfunction, all of the divide. As much as I appreciate the alpha-ness in President Trump and the fact that I know that I want a strong leader, like this is just too much. This is total and complete chaos. And I definitely don't like the fact that literally Trump spends his days just shitting all over Democrats as if there are no good ones out there. And I just hope and pray that our next set of candidates are really ready to kind of reach across the aisle and start to work together in a more level-headed way than what we're seeing right now, because it feels like a disaster. This is like the Real Housewives of politics right now. And I just think there's a major disconnect between leadership and the average everyday American. So, okay, we can fund global conflict, but we can't ensure our own workers are taken care of. We can fund Israel. We can fund Ukraine. We can send millions and millions of dollars out to all of these folks in the world, but we can't pay our TSA workers. Now, I just heard this morning something that Trump signed some executive order to make sure that these people get paid. I think that's absolutely wonderful, but sometimes the damage is done. And he's trying to do things little by little to sort of untarnish his image. But like I said, the damage is already done. Like you're already pissing people off. So let's talk about the economic reality check. Oil volatility is tied to the headlines. This is not fundamentals alone. The markets obviously are reacting to tweets, to posts, to rumors, just whatever it is. And you can make the argument that this has always happened via other types of media streams, but I can tell you that it's the rapid pace at which information comes out today like never before that is just impacting things in ways I don't think anybody has ever anticipated or expected. And so the bigger issue is that information now, rapid information equals extreme economic force. So what happens next? Across journalists and analysts, we really just see this continued messaging volatility, this narrative warfare, market sensitivity, and the unknowns are negotiations actually happening? Are they actually happening? Or is this just another one of Trump's talking points? And is escalation intentional or accidental? Because what really concerns me is if you're going to talk a big game about blowing up power plants, right? And then you're not going to do it, then you look like the weakling. And I know Trump does not seem to want to ever look like a weakling. And so this is what concerns me, is that he's actually going to follow through with it come what may. And this is the part that I don't even want to think about. So this is kind of, the bits about this whole situation that just drive me just a little bit crazy. Right. And I'm sure are driving you crazy, too. And maybe you're somebody who doesn't pay attention to any of this. And that's wonderful. But even if you're not paying attention to this, you're feeling it. You're feeling it in your wallet. no matter whether you watch the news or you don't watch the news, right? This is without a doubt, this is without a doubt impacting you. I want to close with reminding you all that this is bigger than just Iran. It goes far beyond just what's happening in Iran. It's like we need to get Israel under control. They're like the kid that just doesn't want to listen to authority and they're just kind of going rogue and it's costing our country millions and now it's costing us our very own American citizens. As we all know, we've already lost some brave men and women in this fight, which I really believe has been completely unnecessary. And I think we've taken it way too far, sort of just beyond a pale. If we took out their nuclear program, if we took out a lot of what we thought was their most threatening pieces of ammunition, whatever those are, why are we still there? This is about whether anyone is actually steering the ship in a way that is good for the American people, good for strengthening our global relationships. Because right now, it doesn't feel like there is strong leadership in the way that I had hoped we would have gotten from Trump. It feels like we're reacting, we're being reactive instead of proactive. The optics are horrible, and it really just feels like chaos abound. That's just my humble opinion. I'm sure a lot of you probably think, Lolita, what the hell? Like, you're not a journalist. Why are you even talking about any of these things? First of all, I'm trying to bring information to people who maybe aren't as tuned into this as I am. Secondly, it's so important to me that we start to bridge the divide and hear from both sides and try to find a middle ground because living in this chaos is just, it's too much. And it takes the focus away from real positive change that we could be making in the world that we have the ability now more than ever to make. Instead of living under this old world order, honestly, we do have the ability to still make change, whether we want to believe it or not. And so why does this matter to me? It matters because I'm an American tax-paying citizen raising two children in this crazy world. And I'm sure we could all joke around about how things were probably much harder in medieval times. And I'm watching this crazy show with my husband right now that we just started last week. That's a sobering reminder of just how good we have it in the year 2026. But, we've become really soft. Okay. The fact that we have grocery stores to go to whenever we want, we can order food online and have it delivered to our front door. We've become really soft. And so this is what scares me more than anything. We are not prepared for what disaster could really look like. And there is a high probability that there are people who came into this country under the Biden administration when our borders were completely open and porous. I have no doubt that there are people in this country right now that could do some significant ass damage. And I do not have any confidence that we are ready for what bad could really look like. And so the moment you start to get too cocky to see the bigger picture, things get really bad really fast. So we have a lot to be thankful for. I'm very grateful to our military, our army, our servicemen and women, no matter what branch they're in, just anyone in service, really, police, firefighters, EMTs, whatever. So thankful that we have the ability to join these things at will. And that we have these types of people here to support us. I'm so grateful for that. But it's truly imperative to me, just for the health and prosperity of our nation. How are we possibly going to make progress in this country? All of the things that Trump promised during his campaign, it seems like all of them are just a wish that we'll never see come to fruition, a promise we'll never see come to fruition. And maybe this will all work out for the best, and I hope and pray that it does. I really obviously do. I think we all do. I don't know that anybody wants it to not. But then I ask myself sometimes, it really takes radical change. It really takes radical occurrences sometimes for things to shift for the better. And sometimes that's painful for a long time. And out of those painful times comes the good times. And I just think we're just in for a rude awakening if we don't get it together and start to bridge the divide and stop being controlled by foreign policy as much as we are, because it doesn't seem like it's benefiting us. Just ask your bank account. So that'll do it for this episode of What a Fuster Cluck. I'm your host, Lolita Keys. Got some really interesting bookings coming your way in the next several weeks. So be prepared to start seeing more than just my face on this podcast. But I do appreciate your support. Remember, like, share, subscribe, follow, comment, email me, whatafusterclucklk@gmail.com. I always appreciate the feedback and love that you're listening. So remember, share this with a family member, friend, whoever that you think could benefit from the information. And hang in there, everybody. Who knows what next week will bring. Bye.